فاتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله هو الله هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. الفاتحة.
Vielen Dank, Herr Hanowitsch. Herr Hanowitsch ist auch Sekretär der Islamischen Gemeinde der Bosniaken in Deutschland. Vielen Dank auch Herr Hanowitsch vom IGBD. Ich sehe Herrn Meyer von Nackschwende-Orden und Herrn Ibrahim Meral von Unikat. Natürlich Frau Hatice Durmaz, Vorsitzende der RAMSA. Vielen Dank, dass Sie hier sind. Herr Yasser Ulabi, Sekretär der RAMSA und sicher noch viele andere Personen, die ich jetzt vielleicht noch nicht gesehen habe. Vielen Dank Ihnen allen, dass Sie den Weg hierher gefunden haben. Das ist für uns eine große Ehre, diese Veranstaltung an der Goethe-Universität durchführen zu können und vielleicht einige Sätze zu unserem Referenten, bevor dann bevor Herr Bassem Siri dann den Aufschlag macht. Unser Gast, Herr Professor Al-Ninowy, graduierte an der Al-Azhar-Universität und ist Professor der Islamstudien, gleichzeitig aber auch einer der weltweit angesehenen Islamgelehrten und Shaykhs, nebenbei Mikrobiologe, Doktor der Medizin und Professor für Anatomie und Physiologie. Herr Al-Ninowy ist Gründer und Direktor des Madina-Instituts mit Campussen in den USA und Kanada, im Vereinigten Königreich, Norwegen und Schweden, im Sudan, in Südafrika und auf Mauritius, in Indien und Malaysia. Und ist auch Gründer und Direktor des renommierten Medina Center for Non-Violence and Peace Studies, dessen Ziel es ist, das ist ein Zitat, die medinische Schule der Gewaltlosigkeit und des Friedens fortzuführen, wie es dem prophetischen Beispiel entspricht, und den globalen Extremismus herauszufordern in seiner gewalttätigen und seiner nicht gewalttätigen Form. Und das ist auch Thema unseres Vortrags, Muslims for Democracy, Democracy for Muslims. Und dazu hat mein Kollege, der Islamwissenschaftler Herr Bassem Siri, ein Input-Referat vorbereitet und deswegen möchte ich das Mikrofon direkt an ihn weitergeben. Aber erst einmal ein großes Dankeschön für Professor Al-Ninowy, dass er den Weg nach Frankfurt gefunden hat. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Bassem, du hast das Wort.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, sehr verehrter Herr Professor Ninowy, Sie verstehen Deutsch und können sogar auch Deutsch. Deswegen erlaube ich mir einen Input auf Deutsch auch zu machen, mit Ihrer Erlaubnis. Es ist ich habe keinen Anspruch auf eine islamtheologische Einführung zu dem Thema. Überhaupt denke ich, dass es ein sehr großes Thema ist und es gibt sehr viele kleinere Themen, über die viele, mich eingeschlossen, gar nicht sprechen können. Umso besser, dass wir jemanden dabei haben, heute wäre das dran. Aber einige Einleitungen, Beobachtungen zu einem Diskurs über das Thema, wovon wir auch existenziell betroffen waren. Ich habe mir überlegt, ich mache das in Form von kurzen, knappen Thesen, die ich in den Raum werfe, die nicht der Weisheit letzter Schluss sind, die interessant sind, die ja, einfach mal anregen sollen und die ich auch persönlich nicht unbedingt in jeder Hinsicht absolut unterschreibe. Aber es sind, ja, sollten als Anregungen verstanden werden. Erstens, die Behauptung, dass der Islam kategorisch seinem Wesen nach unvereinbar ist mit der Demokratie, wird interessanterweise sowohl von fundamentalistisch-extremistischen Meinungsmachern kolportiert, innerhalb des islamistischen Spektrums, als auch von sogenannten islamkritischen Stimmen. Im Kern sind sie sich einig darüber, was der Islam genau sei, nur nehmen sie gegensätzliche Positionen dann letztendlich ein, was die Konsequenzen daraus betrifft. Die einen sagen, das und jenes ist unsere Vorstellung vom Islam und sagen, wir sind dafür, und die anderen sagen, das und jenes ist unsere Vorstellung vom Islam und die gleichen sich in 99%, aber wir sind dagegen. Ja. Beide Extreme haben eine Erosion der Mitte zum Ziel und drängen, ob gewollt oder ungewollt, die Menschen in die jeweiligen Extreme, sei es das eigene Extrem oder das Extrem des anderen. Das ist wie das Völkerrecht. Zweitens. Der Kern der Aussage, dass der Islam unvereinbar sei mit der Demokratie, liegt eigentlich in einer historischen, man könnte so sagen, Bid'ah. Und zwar dieses Hakimiyya-Konzept. Das Hakimiyya-Konzept ist relativ spät entstanden, von einigen Denkern aufgeworfen, unter anderem Said Qutb, aber nicht nur. Und es gibt eine phänomenologische Parallele dieses Konzepts, das besagt, niemand darf richten, außer Gott allein. Und Menschen, die beurteilen, Gesetze machen, das sind Leute, die sich Gott gegenüberstellen. Das sind Leute, die sich eine Position nehmen, die nur Gott allein gehört. Da gibt es eine historische Parallele zu den häufig erwähnten, in der Tat, Khawarij, einer Gruppe, die auch diesen Anspruch hatte und Sayyidina Ali verurteilt hatte und gesagt hatte, du darfst nicht urteilen, in deinem Konflikt mit einem anderen darfst du nicht Menschen das Urteil überlassen, du musst dieses Urteil Gott überlassen. Was implizit nicht gesagt wurde, ist, die Leute wissen natürlich ganz genau, was Gott weiß und vertreten ist natürlich. Das ist so der Subtext, der nicht gesagt wird. Interessanterweise ist es auch so, dass diese ganzen Gruppierungen nicht ganz genau sagen können und schon gar nicht das widerspiegeln in ihrem Wesen, wer Gott überhaupt ist, sondern sie sagen immer nur, das ist nicht Gott, das ist nicht Gott. Und letztendlich am Ende erreichen sie sich selber und exkludieren sich selbst. Historisch ist es so gewesen, dass diese Gruppen, die Khawarij, angefangen hatten, andere zu bezichtigen, weil sie wussten immer, das ist nicht Gott. So. Und dann fingen sie irgendwann mal an, sich gegenseitig zu bezichtigen, bis sie sich irgendwann mal verflüchtigt haben. Die existieren nicht mehr. Nach 100 Jahren haben sie sich verflüchtigt. Wir haben die existenzielle Erfahrung gemacht, dass wir in einem Chat-Protokoll vor etwa einem halben Jahr im Namen von hessischen Muslime für Demokratie und Vielfalt angefeindet wurden, dass unser Islam hinterfragt wurde, erstmal hinterfragt, später kam es dazu, dass unser Blut tatsächlich für halal erklärt wurde. Und das fing an innerhalb, also das waren auch ganz unterschiedliche extremistische Gruppen, von Hizb-ut-Tahrir-Anhängern bis zu tatsächlichen Dschihadisten. Und die waren sich auch in dem Chat selber beide einig, dass das Kufr ist und derjenige, der das befürwortet, ein Käfer ist, ein Nicht-Muslim. Ein Nicht-Muslim ist, ja. Die haben sich während des Chatverlaufs gar nicht selbst irgendwie hinterfragt. Obwohl, wenn die alleine gelassen würden, die würden sich auch über sich herfallen. Aber solange sie einen gemeinsamen Feind hatten, haben sie sich auf uns gestürzt. Und wie gesagt, mit der Konsequenz, dass sie am Ende erklärt hatten, euer Blut ist halal. Ja? Und keiner von den anderen hat dem widersprochen. Was auch ein bisschen nachdenklich stimmt, ist, dass es keine starke muslimische Mitte gegeben hat. Also eine richtig starke sunnitische Mitte, die sagt, Moment, wohin wollt ihr denn da? Stopp. Ich meine, es ist sowieso, Facebook ist die meisten schlauen Leute lesen einfach nur mit und schreiben. Aber trotzdem, also Foren sollten nicht Krawall machen, überlassen werden. Ein weiteres Beispiel, es gibt in, Shaykh, verzeiht mir, dass ich so lange spreche, ich habe ein Chatprotokoll momentan analysieren hier, in der eine Gruppe von Jugendlichen, die noch nicht mal die Afghanen von Nouveau kennen, über große Themen sprechen wie islamischer Staat, und die wollen einen islamischen Staat aufbauen. Und die haben sich innerhalb von 6 Monaten in einer Chatgruppe getroffen. Wir sind gerade dabei, dieses Chatgespräch zu analysieren. Das wird auch bald veröffentlicht. Innerhalb dieses Chatgesprächs hat sich genau das gezeigt, was ich historisch bei der Verwaltung schon gezeigt hatte, dass sie sich immer mehr zurückgezogen haben. Das wurde teilweise sogar so absurd, dass die waren dann irgendwann nur noch 6, 7 Leute. Und da war einer von denen, der hat gesagt, ich möchte jetzt Freitagsgebet beten. Aber der hat keine Moschee gefunden, wo er das Freitagsgebet beten konnte, weil es sind ja alles Kuffar. Da hat er gesagt, was soll ich machen? Und dann sagt der andere ihm, du kannst mit mir beten, es gibt dafür eine Fatwa. Sowieso, diejenigen, von denen sie die Fatwa nehmen, sind auch alle Kuffar. Aber egal, wenn jemand sich auskennt, sagen sie, dann darf man die Fatwas nehmen und so positionieren, wie man will. Dann sagt er, okay, wir beten zu zweit. Dann kommt der Emir der Gruppe und sagt, Moment, das dürft ihr nicht zu zweit, das darf man nur zu dritt. Dann hat der Erste, der gesagt hat, ich möchte aber zum Freitagsgebet, hat der Emir gesagt, dieser Anführer der Gruppe, wenn du das machst, bist du raus. Der Zweite hat gesagt, Moment, ich habe hier eine Fatwa, warum sagst du das? Und am Ende haben sie sich alle 3 unterschiedliche Himmelsrichtungen sind sie gegangen, haben weder das Freitagsgebet geschafft, weil sie sich darüber gestritten haben, und sind letztendlich auch, sind dann auch gefangen worden. Nächster Punkt. Die Geschichte der Muslime in Deutschland, im Westen allgemein und in Deutschland ist so, dass wir haben ja keine etablierte muslimische Gelehrtentradition, die jetzt hier 100 Jahre oder mehrere 100 Jahre schon ist. Sondern es ist so, dass es hier so etwas wie ein Vakuum gab, und dadurch gab es schon sehr früh eine Gelegenheit für Netzwerke aus anderen Ländern, die sich hier etabliert haben. In Deutschland und auch Strukturen geschaffen haben und Mentalitäten geprägt haben. Auch allein schon in den Idealen, die viele Muslime haben, allein in der Sprache. Also es gibt zum Beispiel das Lob, das höre ich mal wieder, Mashallah, eine aktive Schwester, ein aktiver Bruder. Was aktiv? Radioaktiv, was heißt das aktiv? Also was ist das für ein Ideal? Okay, das ist natürlich gut, engagiert, aktiv zu sein, aber es gibt viele andere Voraussetzungen. Man muss erstmal ein bestimmtes Bildungsgrad erreichen. Also es muss einhergehen mit Aktivismus. Aktivismus an und für sich ist kein Ideal. Wobei das wiederum für einige bestimmte Gruppen tatsächlich ein Ideal darstellt. Die haben sich in Deutschland etabliert, und es ist so, dass insgesamt im Westen, kann man sehen, in vielen, vor allem englischsprachigen Raum, diese zurückgedrängt wurden. Viele unterschiedliche islamistische Gruppierungen sind im anglosächsischen Raum zurückgedrängt worden. Sehr stark. In Deutschland noch nicht so stark. In Frankfurt auch noch nicht so stark. Aber das ist so etwas wie ein Licht, was hier gerade entzündet wird. Dass die zurückgedrängt werden mit ihren komischen Ideologien. Was ist Ideologie? Ideologie ist, nicht mehr so lange, dass man eine Sache nimmt, die es gibt, setzt sie über alle anderen Dinge, opfert alle anderen Dinge, die es auch an ethischen Werten und moralischen Prinzipien gibt, für dieses jeweilige Ziel. Ich kenne eine Gruppe aus Deutschland, die ausdrücklich es erlaubt hat, zu lügen, damit man der jeweiligen Jamaat oder Gruppe dient. Ausdrücklich. Und das wird so als Form von Siyasa verkauft. Langer Rede, kurzer Sinn. Islam ist etwas, was sehr breit ist, wovon wir heute etwas mitbekommen werden. wenn Islam Partei wird, egal ob es Muslimbruderschaft ist oder Hizb-ut-Tahrir ist, wenn Islam Partei wird alles, was nicht Partei ist, unislamisch. Wenn Islam auf Partei reduziert wird, dann wird alles, was nicht zu dieser Partei gehört, tendenziell unislamisch. Die Steigerung ist, wenn Islam Staat wird. Wenn Islam Staat wird alles, was nicht Staat ist, Apostat. Historisch haben wir in der Geschichte nie ein Phänomen gehabt, was sich islamischer Staat nennt. Wir haben Staaten gehabt, die sich immer auf den Islam berufen haben, aber nie hatten wir so etwas, also eine Anmaßung, dass jemand sagt, wir sind der islamische Staat. Es gab die verschiedene Duel, Abbasiden, Mamluki, die nennen sich immer nach bestimmten Personen, sogar die Rechtsschulen, die nennen sich da nicht Rechtsschulen des Islams, die nennen sich nach bestimmten großen Personen. Und nicht so anmaßend, dass sie sagen, wir sind Islam, dass sie sich identifizieren mit Islam. Allerletztes Wort. Es gibt eine sehr präzise Analyse, ganz knapp, von Hans Yusuf, finde ich wunderbar, der sagt, wir reden heute viel über den Islam, aber wenig über Gott, über Allah. Das ist etwas, so eine sehr präzise Analyse, weil, also wenn wir viel über den Islam sprechen, aber wenig über Gott, worüber sprechen wir denn eigentlich dann? Was ist das, worüber wir da sprechen? Und diese Islamisierung des Islams, das sind Geschehnisse, die wir rückgängig machen wollten möchten. Der Islam ist islamisch genug. Und wir sind sehr froh, dass wir heute Professor Ninowy dabei haben. Er hat eine sehr interessante Herangehensweise. Er versucht immer, so wie ich seine Herangehensweise verstanden habe, Verschiedenes zusammenzubringen. Das ist so seine Methode, die ich genommen habe, enthalten. Und ja, ich übergebe Ihnen das Wort und danke für die Geduld und Ihnen allen, dass Sie mir zugehört haben.
Erlauben wir noch zwei Sätze. Herr Marcel ist Islamwissenschaftler am Institut für Islamstudien der Goethe-Universität Frankfurt am Main und ist mein Kollege im Projekt Muslime für Demokratie und Vielfalt. Und das, was du gesagt hast, haben wir uns ja auch auf die Fahne geschrieben, dass Vielfalt etwas ist, was es zu respektieren gilt. Und da sehen wir eigentlich auch oft so eine Ambivalenz, wenn Muslime auf der einen Seite Toleranz einfordern mit Recht und Akzeptanz für ihr Anderssein und auch Respekt. Andererseits dann aber anderen Muslimen gegenüber nicht dieselbe Toleranz aufzeigen und eher darauf aus sind, Makel zu finden, um diese dann herabzuwürdigen. Also das ist, denke ich, auch ein wichtiger Grundsatz der von Professor Al-Ninowy. Vielen Dank, ich gebe Ihnen das Wort.
Ja, also, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, alhamdulillah, rabbil alamin, sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad, sayyidil awwalin wal akhirin, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa azwajihi wa ahbabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Also, es ist eine Ehre, von ihm eingeladen zu werden. Ich vertraue mir nicht, auf Deutsch zu reden oder zu sprechen, aber versuchen wir auf Englisch, ne? Safer for me. Also vielen Dank, ne? Meine Kollegen hier und Ihnen alle. First of all, I have an issue with the epistemological limitation of the word democracy anyway, and using it as a benchmark. So I'm going to use always, when I use the word democracy, I'm going to be using values that it represents, major values, because even in the usul, la mushaqata fil istilah. Istilah or terminology is invented, and it's not holy. But we're talking about certain democratic values that we're going to be talking about, so that's what I want to say. So So to just clarify, Islam and democracy, and I'm talking about democratic values, major democratic values that really sort of bring what democracy is. We'll talk about it as we go on, but I find myself sort of in need to sort of go and lay some background issue. Democracy obviously is determined, as it is today, it's determined by many different elements. Culture, wealth, equalities, education, and some will also say religion. Religion is a determinant of democratic development, and it has been extensively studied by many, and obviously lots of arguments have been presented supporting the claim that religion hinders democracy versus where others say that actually it supports it. Anyway, I think it's important for us as Muslims, let's say German Muslims here or American, for that, to look at a couple of theories that really touch the core of Islam and democracy as it is practiced in Western liberal governments, such as the United States of America, or let's say Germany and countries like that. And I'm talking about two specific thinkers, Samuel P. Huntington and Francis Fukuyama. All right, so we have the clash of civilization, and we have the end of history and the last man. These things were written in the early 90s, and there's been an increased focus on the relationship between Islam and democracy starting from that point on. And it seems, I'm not, again, this clash of civilizations, I really don't like that. I don't want to use the word hate. I think the word hate is too strong for me to use. But I don't like an idea about a clash between civilizations. I don't think civilizations want to clash. I don't think people want to clash with each other. It doesn't matter what they believe, but I think there are obviously elites that would like to have that clash happen. So you've got Fukuyama and Huntington both talking about the world order in the 20th century, that it has shifted into a clash between the West and the East, specifically between the West and Islam. So that was basically the outcome. In his book, The Clash of Civilization and the Remaking of World Order, published in 1996, he argues that the clash is inevitable between the world's major civilizations, identifying 7 and possibly 8. Western, Latin American, Islamic, Chinese, Hindu, Orthodox, Japanese, and possibly African. This cultural organization contrasts the contemporary world with the classical notion of sovereign states. To understand, that means, he's saying, to understand current and future conflict, cultural rifts must be understood, and culture, rather than state, must be accepted as the reason for war, he states. Culture rather than state. All right, you all know, obviously, culture includes lots. Religion and culture, there's a sort of a mix all the time with them. Thus, he maintains, thus Western nations will lose predominance if they fail to recognize the irreconcilable nature of cultural tensions. Interestingly, Huntington wrote, and that I found that very interesting because that was written in the 1990s, in the mid-90s, but he writes this, that Ukraine might divide along the cultural line between the more Catholic Western Ukraine and the Orthodox Eastern Ukraine, but he views that there's not going to be as much bloodshed in that Ukraine divide like there will be in, let's say, Middle Eastern or Islamic cultures and their struggle with the Western liberal democracies. Interesting that this came in the 1990s. Anyway, in regards to Muslims, he argues that this clash is highlighted by Muslim resistance to democratic development and modernity, which he attributes to the nature of the religion of Islam. All right. As far as Fukuyama, so let's go to Fukuyama real quick. Fukuyama, in his End of History and the Last Man, in which he argues that the progression of human history as a struggle between ideologies is largely at an end, and the world is settling on liberal democracies. And this is it. So after the end of the Cold War, after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, this is it. The world has ended, the end of history, and now he's predicting a global triumph of political and economic liberalism, meaning what he says, a couple of things. Number one, he says that history should be viewed as an evolutionary process. Events still occur at the end of history. Pessimism, he says, about humanity's future is warranted. You ought to be pessimistic, he says, because of humanity's inability to control advancing technology. The end of history means liberal democracy in the final form, he says, of government for all nations. There can be no progression from liberal democracy to an alternative system, and hence he says that the universalization of Western liberal democracies is the final form of human government. And again, whether this is obviously a theory by two thinkers, whether this is happening or not happening or adopted by, let's say, the political elite or not adopted, that's something for thinkers to look at and sort of evaluate. Going on, so let's go now to the point of democracy. Like I said, democracy is a word. Now, I don't want to argue where it came from, its Latin origin, all that stuff. I'm sure you already know. I want to go beyond the label, because I don't really care what you call democracy in the sense. I want to know, what do you mean by democracy? So let's go to the values that are presented by democracy rather than just talking about it. Is democracy this or that? Let's keep that aside. First, you need to find the definition of the term and set the standard for what constitutes a democratic system. Scholars obviously have not been able to sort of pinpoint it, but nevertheless we found some common grounds, such as common grounds of major values of democracy. Independent branches of government. Independent branches of government. Such as, I'm sure you have the same thing here, you've got the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch, right? Executive, legislative, and the judiciary. That all three branches of government must be absolutely independent. And that's one sign, or one major sign, obviously, of a democracy. And you've seen that in action just last week at home in the United States of America. Obviously, when the president, here the executive branch, issued an executive order, and the judiciary branch blocked it. All right? That's democracy in action. Also, obviously, we talk about other common grounds in democratic systems, and again, these are values that I want to discuss, rather than just discuss the label democracy itself, because then we're gonna be talking back and forth about democracies and all that. So we're talking independent branches of government, where the legal system is independent, where the executive is independent, where the legislative is independent. Then we talk about another common ground, which is free press, and which means the freedom of expression, again. A freedom of expression in a system. That's absolutely important. And that means, obviously, freedom of faith and religion as well in that. Most importantly, obviously, when we talk about also the free press, we're talking about the institution of elections, that the government is elected, or representation is elected. Citizen participation through elections is one of the most important indicators for a democratic system. But it is not sufficient, because even authoritarian regimes may hold elections and find democracy. So let's focus then on a procedural, minimalist definition of a democracy, which presumes fully contested elections with full suffrage and the absence of massive fraud. Notice massive fraud, not just little. Combined with effective guarantee of civil liberties, effective guarantee of civil liberties, including, again, freedom of speech, assembly, and association. these things are values that democracies speak about, and I want to talk about them rather than just say democracy. We want to know the value. The second question about the concept of democracy that I want to address is also, is democracy itself, is it dichotomous or is it graded? Dichotomous or graded? In other words, are political systems either democratic or non-democratic? Is it the black and white issue? Or are they either more democratic or less democratic? That's another issue that we want to talk about. Sartori, one of the thinkers, mentioned basically that two procedures take place, or must take place, when evaluating democratic development in any region around the world. Number one, is that region democratic based on a procedural, minimalist definition of democracy? And if it is democratic, then how democratic it is. And basically what he mentions, so we know, he says that, and I quote, the distinction between democracy and non-democracy should be treated as dichotomous. Hence, the essential initial task is to establish exhaustive and mutually exclusive categories of democracy and non-democracy. According to Sartori, obviously, he says there's a fine line between what is democratic, what's a democratic system, and what is not. And that is where the concept of democracy is dichotomous. In other words, is that system democratic or is it not democratic? Now, but he also suggests that once a country is deemed democratic, a graded evaluation of its level of democracy can be applied to it. Thus, what makes democracy possible should not be mixed up with what makes democracy more democratic itself. And I think that's important as well. So let's go to the idea now of existence between, again, I want to say, quote-unquote, democracy or democratic values and Islam. Because that has raised controversy, obviously, among writers and theorists. On one hand, many present significant empirical evidence to prove that in Muslim majority countries, democracy is either weak or non-existent. And they use religion to explain this phenomenon. In other words, Islam is to blame for Muslim majority countries not having a democracy. But I'm going to say again, a system where there is election, free press, participation, expression, freedom of expression, etc., etc. So again, I'm going to always use that back and forth, democracy and democratic values, just so, because I understand the issues about this thing. The others suggest, and I tend to belong to this team, that suggests that religion cannot be used as an explanation to explain democratic development in Muslim majority countries, and hence they attribute the lack of democracy in Muslim majority countries not to Islam, but to other factors. All right, so there is a sort of a current political world understanding, at least in the West in general, that where Islam is, freedom, I'm going to use freedom more than just democracy. I like freedom more than democracy, but anyway, because again, what we talk. But democratic values, let's say, that we've just talked about, cannot exist. That they're both mutually exclusive. And that's the argument of Samuel P. Huntington and also other thinkers as well. He writes, Huntington writes in his Clash of Civilization, that he asserts that Muslim countries are infertile ground for democratic development, and hence, he quote, the underlying problem for the West, he says, the underlying problem for the West is not Islamic fundamentalism, it is Islam. He says, a different civilization whose people are convinced, and he argues, a different civilization whose people are convinced of the superiority of their culture and are obsessed with the inferiority of their power. End quote. He obviously, he says, he continues to say that this leads Muslims to reject Western values, including democracy, which leaves them disadvantaged and controlled by authoritarian regimes. Furthermore, obviously, Huntington suggests that the general failure of liberal democracy to take hold in Muslim societies is a continuing and repeated phenomenon. Now, going to Fukuyama, who also sort of echoes more or less the same, he argues that there does seem to be something about Islam. Again, not Islamic fundamentalism or extreme. I don't like to say fundamentalism. Let me say extremism, because fundamentalism, from a linguistic point of view, means true to the faith. But anyway, so extremism, and also in that sense, I want to make extremism in the current context, because you can always argue that Jesus was considered extreme in his time. But what I mean, and then obviously violent or hateful extremism in that sense, which is inconsistent with Islamic teaching. Anyway, Fukuyama goes to say that there does seem to be something about Islam, or at least the fundamentalist version of it, that has been dominant in recent years. And again, he says dominant, and I'm stopping here because if you go to Muslim majority countries, 1.6 billion people, there's absolutely no dominance of any extremism per se. If there is, suffering, not dominance of extremism. Suffering from extremism. What I'm trying to say is, not just now, but even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, before Fukuyama and Huntington wrote their books, Muslims still constituted the largest numbers of human beings that suffered from violence portrayed on them, imposed on them, from Afghanistan and so on. Muslims constituted the largest numbers of victims of violence in the world. Muslims constituted the largest numbers of victims of wars in the world. When he wrote his book in the 1990s, that was after the first Gulf War. Muslims constituted the largest... Did I say something wrong? All right. Muslims did constitute also the largest numbers of refugees in the world. Before that, the irony in all this, and again, that I think that both thinkers don't see that, and by the wider world communities, that they see that Muslims still constitute a disruption to an otherwise calm and content world. They didn't choose this violence to come onto their lands or wars. All right, let me just continue what Fukuyama says. He says that the fundamentalist version of Islam that has been dominant in recent years, that makes Muslim societies particularly resistant to modernity, he says. So basically for Fukuyama, modernity is characterized by institutions like liberal democracies and capitalism. Fukuyama uses Islam as a yardstick that offers an easy cultural essentialist explanation to the absence of democracy from most of the Muslim majority countries. In this, obviously, he converges with other culturalists blaming Islam for whatever goes wrong in a Muslim majority country. Therefore, it is important for us to test their claims. I mean, these claims are not just their claims, unfortunately, but these claims they seem to be the widely accepted claims today in political theory in the world. So it's important to test their claims by looking at authentic Islamic doctrine and whether it truly is incompatible with democratic values. And second, by analyzing empirical data to uncover Muslim attitudes towards democracy. Empirical data. And obviously from a statistical point of view, I mean, you can't speak without data. That becomes just a blanket judgment without any backbones. Okay, so examining what the claims, and let's see. So the first problem that I found, that I think that exists within the theories of both Huntington and Fukuyama's about Islam's undemocratic nature, is that they both fail to understand the faith system itself. John Anderson, in his book, Does God Matter? End quote, recounts a significant characteristic of religion that many scholars, meaning political scholars, socio-political scholars, fail to address. He writes, "For Beetham, the trouble with all such negative hypotheses about religion and democratization is that they treat religion as monolithic. And that means whether their core doctrines are typically subject to a variety of schools and interpretations, and as immutable, when they are notoriously revisionists in the face of changing circumstances and political current.
So that's, I think, very important. In a wide-ranging essay published in 2001, Alfred Steppen suggested that all religious traditions were multifocal, containing organizational and intellectual resources that could be called upon in support of democratic forms of governance. All right, so I think there's many points here that we need to look into. Many writers, excluding Huntington and Fukuyama and the like, understand that Islam cannot be referred to as one form except in the main universal values Islam brings forth, such as justice, equality, and let's say doing good, forbidding, warding off evil, etc., etc. Positive contribution to the world, things like this. Muslims throughout history have innovated and practiced different and oftentimes contradictory political doctrines while claiming religious rooting to all these systems. And sometimes what you will find is an amazing sort of relationship. Extreme Islamophobes and religious extremists insist that they are the only ones who have the right understanding of Islam. Both equally so. So let's look into some accounts into all that stuff. First of all, political power, absolute political power, is addictive. And it's a problem in a sense. Lord Acton, an English Catholic historian, politician, and writer who died in 1902 in Germany, said in a famous quote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men," he says, end quote. All right, in other words, people who we glorify. Alexander the Great, obviously mass murder, right? Etc., etc. I mean, things like that, he means. Examples of absolute power corrupting are Roman emperors, who, you remember, declared themselves gods. There's no point to say we're messengers, we're prophets. They just said we're gods. End of story. They might as well do it. Authoritarian rulers in Europe and other parts of the world in the Middle Ages, they drew their legitimacy from the church, from religion. The best for a political tyranny is to gain religious sacredness. In other words, the best scenario for any political dictatorship or tyranny is to get legitimization from a religious tyranny. And I always say, what's worse than political tyranny is religious tyranny. Political tyranny may kill, may rob the country blind, may steal, may be corrupt, and more. Religious tyranny does all that and then some, but in the name of God. The worst example is when you have this unholy matrimony between both religious tyranny and political tyranny. Now go deal with this. All right? So it seems that this is what's now evolving as what's called political religion. Political religion is based on the observation that sometimes political ideologies, and we're going through that also, political ideologies or political systems display features more commonly associated with religion. Scholars who have studied these phenomena include William Connolly in political science, Christoph Deutschmann in sociology, Emilio Gentile in history, and Oliver O'Donovan in theology, and others in psychiatry also, or psychology. A political religion often occupies the same ethical, psychological, and social space as a traditional religion. And as a result, it often displays or co-opts existing religious organizations and beliefs. The most central marker of a political religion involves the sacralization of politics, which means politics becomes sacred. Whatever the political leadership does, that's sacred. All right? Dangerous stuff. Although a political religion may co-opt existing religious structures or symbolism, it does not itself have any independent spiritual or theocratic elements. So they shy away just barely from saying we are a theocracy. Just barely, not much. But use everything else that religion may offer. It is essentially secular, using religious motives and methods for political purposes. If it does not reject religious faith outright, usually. All right, so that's what we're talking about. In addition to basic form of politics, like parliament, elections, political religion also holds an aspect of sacralization related to the institutions contained within the regime. In other words, the regime will have institutions and organizations and stuff. They also become sacred. You can't touch them. That's too holy. Related to you can't question, you can't say no, you can't dissent. The right to dissent is robbed away from the people because obviously it's sacred now. Contained within the regime also provides the inner measures traditionally considered to be religious territory, such as ethics, values. So now the political religion provides now this ethics, values, symbols, myths, rituals, and for example, other things as well. Let me give you an example here with political religious organizations, such as the Nazi Party in Germany, adhere to the idealization of cultural and political power over the country at large. The church body of the state no longer held control over the practices of religious identity. Because of this, Nazism was countered by many political and religious organizations as being a political religion based on the dominance which the Nazi regime had. And that's according to Gates and Steen. Political religions generally vie with existing traditional religions and may try to replace or eradicate them. Why? Because usually religions that offer a spiritual solution, they offer things that may contradict with political religion. They need to take it out because it sort of bothers them. Totalitarian societies are perhaps more prone. Totalitarian societies or weak democracies that just emerged out of dictatorship are the most prone to political religion. But various scholars, and that's the dangerous one in my view, various scholars have described features of political religion even in democratic societies. For instance, American civil religion as described by Robert Bellah in 1967. And what that means, the American civil religion or civil religion, now not political religion, civil religion, what that means is that basically civil religion using it as it functions more as a socially unifying. So civil religion is something that's socially unifying and essentially conservative force that all society participates to. And this is the values that are accepted. It becomes like religion. This is the civil religion that you need to believe in. So in other words, also it's a backdoor to stripping away the freedom of expression and freedom to dissent. Because this is the civil religion you need to have. And again, Robert Bellah in 1967 found that this is now creeping into Western liberal democracies, which is very dangerous, obviously. All right, so now if I want to say something about political religion in Islam. Okay, so with political religion, my view is that it is not native to Muslims as a faith, but it is a human phenomenon. In other words, people have always used religion to justify political motives. Always, not just Islam. And I always say, a lot of people think that religion is to blame for all the wars and the violence that happen in the world today. My dear, the cause for wars and violence in the world today is ambition, envy, and greed. The causes for wars and violence in the world today and yesterday and tomorrow: ambition, greed, and envy. But in an order to sanitize these self-serving emotions, we cloak them in religious rhetoric. You cloak them in religious rhetoric, you can mobilize the masses. You can't mobilize the masses for your envious objections or etc., etc. All right. So anyway, in my view, obviously, that true religion, and I believe Islam is a true faith, a true religion, gives all people, those who believe in it and those who disbelieve in it as well, gives them all hope, growth, and opportunity. There can never be coercion in true religion. True religion cannot be based on inequality, lack of unconditional compassion towards all, and love. Religion, in my view, is the art of the noblest possible, the most virtuous possibly attainable, the art of the next righteous best. Therefore, I'm saying religion and the religious are not necessarily the same. In fact, I say that the religious are probably guilty at pushing off a lot of people who would like religion otherwise. But anyway, Islamic canonical law or Sharia, as presented, I know this is another word, I don't want to go there now, but maybe some other time. As presented in the Quran and the authentic prophetic Sunnah, offers a framework of creedal, matters of belief, jurisprudential and human right, inter-human relations, ethics, character building, etc. Among the most important values Islam institutionalized was the freedom of belief, where the Quran says, Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, La ikraha fid din. End quote. And the verse means there is no coercion in religion. There's no compulsion in religion. All right. For a faith stemming, because if we say there's a faith that stems from coercion or no absolute freedom, that is by definition enslavement to people and pleasing to them, not to the Creator of all. True faith is the one that stems from absolute conviction above any uncertainty and beyond any doubt, along with the sincerity in application without having to worship for the sake of show off or ostentation, pressure or lack of belief. What prevents, for example, a Muslim woman or man during the month of Ramadan, when they fast from sunrise to sunset, from going and drinking and eating? It's a conviction that is above any doubt in a sense and beyond any uncertainty. And that's what we call in Islam ikhlas, or selflessness, or transparency. Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, fa'budillaha mukhlisan lahu ad-din. Ala lillahi ad-din al-khalis. To Allah belongs in other words, you worship Him with absolute selflessness or transparency. There's a hadith I'd like to hadith that Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim both narrated. So a narration by Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, that Mu'adh radiyallahu ta'ala anhu said, بعثني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يوما قال إنك تأتي قوما من أهل الكتاب. So let me just translate the hadith directly into English so we can save some time also. That Mu'adh, a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith is authentic, said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent me to some other country or place, and he said to me, you will be going to the people who believe in the heavenly books that they were revealed before us. So call them to testify to that there is no God but Allah, and I am His messenger. If they accept, notice now, so you're going to go to some place, all right? Call them. Is that doing an echo?
No, maybe.
All right, I don't want to be screaming, sorry. Am I screaming?
No.
Okay. Because there's no point in screaming. I don't like screaming. So he says you're going to people to call them. So call them first by telling them that there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His messenger. And then he tells him, فَإِنْهُمْ أَطَاعُوا لِذَلِكَ, which means, and if they accept that, then inform them that Allah obliged them to pray 5 times a day. فَإِنْهُمْ أَطَاعُوا لِذَلِكَ. If they accept that, then inform them that Allah obliged them to give charity to the needy taken from their wealthy ones, given to their poor ones. If they accept that, the Prophet ﷺ keeps saying, if they accept, فَإِنْهُمْ أَطَاعُوا لِذَلِكَ, if they accept that, then be careful to lead towards injustice or inequality. Be careful that you don't do injustice or inequality, and avoid the prayer of the oppressed. In other words, avoid someone who you oppress and prays against you to God, for nothing prevents it from being answered by Him. From this authentic narrative, one can see a true religious calling which stems in the absolute free choice and personal conviction without any coercion or force. It also demonstrates that commanding essential Islamic pillars of faith, such as salah, such as prayers, giving alms, etc., despite being obligatory upon the believers, but the prophetic command said always, and I quote, if they accept, then inform them. If they accept, then inform them. If they accept, then inform them. This is again because even in matters of religion, it ought to come from the believer's heart without any coercion. If we understand this and understand the vast meaning of Sharia, obviously, then we realize the freedom it affords to all individuals, those who believe in it and those who don't believe in it. I say among the beauties that Islam told us, that Allah, God, who created us, as we believe, gave you the freedom to believe in Him or to disbelieve in Him. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Haqq is, truth is from your Lord. Those who want to believe, believe. Those who don't want to believe, don't believe. All right. So, what I'm saying here is obviously for freedom of choice is the essence of accountability in the Day of Judgment. Accountability meaning for the jurist's taklif, right? Understanding Sharia in its wide frame also includes matter of belief, jurisprudence, ethics, which leads us to understand that the Sharia is present anywhere there exists truthfulness, trustworthiness, generosity, helping the needy, feeding the hungry, and other good things that all people do. There is a level of Islam in that sense, in the sense of practice. Furthermore, another issue that we look at when we talk about Islam and its and does it contradict democratic values, the concept of ijtihad. Ijtihad means independent reasoning, and that's a jurisprudential avenue that allows Muslim scholars in any era to interpret or reinterpret Islamic laws and decipher new interpretations. This is why many writers, for many writers, there is no such thing as a single Islamic political tradition. And they suggest that within the varying Islamic traditions, there were ample intellectual resources for those seeking to promote democratic governance. John Anderson writes or refers to two writers. John Esposito, I don't know if many of you know him, is in the U.S. and is known, and John Ovall. All right. Who point out that, and I quote, it might well be possible to draw on Islamic traditions that were compatible with the core concern of democracy with participation, while allowing it to take into account the specific concerns of Muslims for recognition of special identities or authentic communities, end quote. Anderson notes that these two writers, like others, look at specific concepts of shura, not just now ijtihad, but shura. And shura means consultation, consulting with others. That's what parliamentarians do today, right? And another concept called ijma', which is consensus. and ijtihad, independent reasoning, as, and I quote, providing intellectual basis, some intellectual basis for the development of Muslim democracies. So consensus, ijma', consultation, shura, and ijtihad, independent reasoning, these are all core values that democracies today practice, that Islam talked about long time ago anyway, way before people talked about democracies in a sense, in this specific contextual sense meaning. All right. Although all these three concepts are important in Islamic jurisprudence and imply a democratic culture within Islam, the most significant and relevant to this discussion is the concept of shura. The literal translation of shura is consultation. It appears in the Quran, the word shura, it appears many times commanding members of societies to consult one another about their affairs in 4 spheres of society: the political, the economic, the social, and the spiritual as well. The verse that is relevant to this discussion is in chapter 42, and وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُم, all right, and which means those who answer the call of their Lord and establish worship, and those whose affair are a matter of counsel or consultation among them. End quote. So based on this and other concepts, Islam would be closer to democratic values than Huntington and Fukuyama and the like suggest. Looking solely at authentic Islamic doctrine, it is clear that Islam is not only compatible with what democratic values today, the major democratic values that are practiced today, but is one of its strongest proponent. As Simon Bromley writes, and I quote, by various obvious criteria, universalism, scripturalism, spiritual egalitarianism, the extension of full participation in the sacred community, not to one or some, but to all, and the rational systemization of social life, Islam is one of 3 great Western monotheisms, the one closest to modernity, and by implication, therefore, the one closest to in principle to democracy. End quote. Should I give that? Let me continue. Is that good?
Yes.
All right. So, all right. Let me talk about now some empirical data. I want to finish with the empirical data, and then we'll probably be done. Because we talk about also, we can't just cite things without empirical data. Obviously, with Huntington arguing that religious tradition does have an impact upon the likely success of democratization efforts, but empirical data reveals the contrary. Myungi Kim recounts the 1995 to 2001 World Values Survey, which found that, I quote, the World Values Survey, Muslims and members from other religions give about the same support for democratic ideals and leadership. So you can go ahead and see what she wrote about all that stuff, but I don't want to take too much time in it. I want to also come to an end as much as I can. Anderson also presents similar data, asserting that up to 40% of the world's Muslims, he says, live in countries that are more or less democratic. He says again, let me say, I know, up to 40% of Muslims of the world today live in countries that are more or less democratic, often as minorities. You all are a minority here in Germany, but your minority is few million. In the United States, American Muslims are about 7 to 9 million. In France, in other places. So when you look at that, Anderson is saying there's about half of Muslims live already in democracies anyway. But anyway, a more generous survey published in John Esposito's book entitled Who Speaks for Islam suggests that Muslims, ironically, even many of the 7%, classing themselves as radical. They classify themselves radical. In fact, admire the West for its democracy and freedoms. However, they do not want such things imposed on them. Muslims, he says, Muslims want self-determination, but not an American imposed and defined democracy. said Esposito. What the majority wants is democracy with religious values, he says. So, again, we're looking at things. Consequently, Muslims themselves do not reject democratic values, such as, again, I'm stepping away from democracy, I'm talking about democratic values. So we understand each other. What do you mean by democracy? What democratic values such as what? Free elections. Muslims don't hate free elections. We've practiced free elections from the beginning. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was elected. All right? Free press, freedom of speech. Muslims don't detest these things, they love them. As Huntington's claim, obviously, he says that they don't like it. But indeed, their religion encourages them to aspire and work towards a healthy and transparent society, obviously, whether socially, economically, and politically. As for, I don't know if we can negotiate also Fukuyama's notion, and let me not go there. I think it's clear already. Let me answer the question is then if Islam is not the problem, it's not the cause of this democratic deficiency in Muslim majority countries, then what is? What accounts for Muslim majority countries' rejection of democracy? And what factors play a significant role in shaping the political tradition of Muslim majority countries? Scholars also have offered many potential explanations to these questions, three explanations for that are: one, suspicion and negative feelings towards the West; two, economic development; three, authoritarian and dictatorships leading. All right, let's talk about them real quick so we can be done. Because Muslim majority countries historically experienced colonialization by the West and post-colonialization tradition as well, Muslim majority countries have developed negative feelings towards the West, unfortunately, in general. Western imperialism, war, exploitation, and political interference in the Middle East and other Muslim majority countries led to an entrenched feeling of distrust, fear, and insecurity. Because democracy is generally thought of as a product of the West, many Muslim community in Muslim majority countries, unfortunately, have doubts about it and have been reluctant to accept a Western-style democracy. Many Muslim thinkers and scholars view that Western liberal democracies are ethnocentric as well when it comes to values, and while they agree with a lot of it, but such values should not constitute an alternative religion or a civil religion that is imposed on them. They want to also be free in sort of drawing out their ways in their societies, rather than accepting a whole package as is, an ethnocentric based package. Allow people to be free, build and develop their own version of a free system which speaks to their issues and concerns rather than the superimposed Western liberal values. So it's not about free elections necessarily, or free press, or expression of free speech, etc., etc. Huntington points out that quote, the West's simultaneous efforts to universalize, Huntington saying, the West's simultaneous efforts to universalize its values and institutions, to maintain its military and economic superiority, and to intervene in conflicts in the Muslim world generate intense resentment among Muslims, end quote. That's Huntington's own words. But that's a reality. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality. It's unfortunate because people ought to differentiate between politics and people. Right? I live in the West, you all live in the West. I mean, the West is home for me. America is home for me. So you all know the difference between... People are decent out there. The German people are good people out there. American people are decent, great people. Surely there's always the good, the bad, and the ugly everywhere. I mean, we're human beings at the end of the day. But people, by large, are good people. And even the malice, I always say, the hate that you see out there, Islamophobia, hateful Islamophobia that you see out there and you experience, in my view, it doesn't stem from malice. It stems from ignorance. These people are not really bad. They're just ignorant. They don't know about Islam. They don't know who you are. And that's why I say it's no longer good enough for Muslim minorities living in the West to be good with the law of the land only. No good. Sorry. They have to be good with the people of the land, not just the law of the land. The law of the land is good. I know that Muslims are law-abiding citizens. Great. I love you too. That's not good enough. We've got to be good with the people of the land, not just the law of the land. And I know American Muslims are law-abiding citizens, one of the most educated, wealthiest Muslim communities in the world. Law-abiding, but that's not good enough. Why? Well, because of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is real. The harms that Islamophobia brings are real. And they threaten not just Muslim minorities, they threaten democracy itself and societies and other minorities as well. All right, so I just needed to say these things because I think they're important. Let me say this. So the question to Muslims is never the main issues of democracy, such as free press, free elections, freedom of expression, human rights, and so on. But a few superimposed, imported values that may overstep their cultural or religious traditions and identity. That's all. Effectively then, democracy itself, with its most, if not all, of its major components, is accepted by Muslims in practice. But certain Western values associated with democracy may not be. And that's secondary. Thus, although religion does not hinder democracy in Muslim-majority countries, certain socio-cultural elements in Muslim societies prevent them from unconditionally accepting the whole package that comes from Western liberal democracies, though they accept most of it. Another leading factor to the lack of democracy in the Muslim-majority countries is the presence of very powerful and hostile authoritarian regimes. In such cases, although the citizens long for democracy, the existing regimes reject democracy to protect its power and interests. Therefore, some will argue that the focus of democratic study should not be on cultural preconditions, but rather on key social and political factors. Now, this is important for the Muslim-majority countries, which are haunted by authoritarian regimes and dictatorships under a wide list of labels. I mean, today they're even using democracy while they're dictatorships. But they use democratic things. They use democratic slogans. And it's really difficult to catch up with all that stuff because they're learning the bad side of Western liberal democracies. They're not learning the good progress that Western liberal democracies have done in civil rights and all that stuff. So they're just trying to come towards the end. And it's very frustrating. So people in Muslim majority societies tend to have a propensity towards democracy. But what makes it less possible for them to achieve is obviously the political governance, is that nature, that the overstated, overblown, overstretched state structure and the heavy-handed authoritarian regimes in power at the present time. Many Muslim thinkers see also, another reason, a hypocritical double standard application of Western democracies. And that's another issue. Meaning what? Democracy has been cited recently as a reason to declare war on sovereign nations, or to topple regimes that exist, totalitarian regimes, sure, and instate democracy, Western-based democracy. But it is adopting violent means to bring peace. Since when death brings life? Since when destruction brings construction? Since when we establish freedom by giving bullets and bombs and destroying countries? While we see it, I mean, you all know we live in the world today. So and at the end, well, we're sorry, it was an information intel mistake. They did not have a nuclear weapon, but meanwhile we did kill 1 million people. Oh well, that's not an important number. And then the story keeps going. So these are grievances. I'm not saying anything. Again, I'm not a politician. So all I'm saying is these are grievances that sometimes Muslim majority countries, just people themselves sort of find resentment with. And for same things. I mean, today what's happening under the name of let's democratize some of these totalitarian regimes. I mean, is there any other way other than violence? Is violence the only mean to democratize societies? I mean, we need to really look into that, because we're sort of, the world is in a mess today as far as the violence that's used to destroy cities, kill people, dislocate millions of innocent people, turning them into refugees. And then the problem becomes them as well. I mean, it's always the other that's the problem. It's not what we're doing, not internal criticism. Plunging whole countries into total chaos, endless bloodshed, massive destruction, looting of national resources. This give any credence to the claim of instating democracy in such countries. It takes any credence from saying, I want to establish democracy. Because when you lose your loved ones, when people die and lose limbs and they have their homes destroyed, the last thing they think about is democracy. All right? In my view, again, one cannot neglect economic, geopolitical motivation and double standards behind some practices of Western liberal democracies. I think that's one of the reasons, or the three reasons, like I mentioned before, that why do I think that what is the problem? How come in Muslim majority countries there is a problem in democracy? There's deficiency. Like so, again, it's the three things, and that's where I'll end. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Okay, jetzt sind es 20:25 Uhr. Wir haben 35 Minuten. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Thank you ever so much for this inspiration. I want to pick up a few points. Ich mache das aber auf Deutsch, weil Sie mich ja auch auf Deutsch verstehen.
Ja.
Ich fange mal da an, wo Siri auch angefangen hat. Unser Projekt nennt sich Muslime für Demokratie und Vielfalt. Hier unten können Sie sehen, wir haben uns als drei Schlüsselbegriffe ausgewählt: Islam, Demokratie, Menschenrechte. Jetzt werden wir dafür natürlich, Herr Siri hat es erzählt, angegriffen, gibt es ständig den Diskurs, gesagt wird, was, ihr wollt Muslime sein, wie könnt ihr denn da für Demokratie sein? Islam und Demokratie geht doch nicht zusammen. Ja? Islam ist die Herrschaft Allahs und Demokratie die Herrschaft des Menschen. Ja. Jetzt möchte ich die Frage stellen, ob dieses Verständnis, dass islamische Staaten in ihrer 1400-jährigen Geschichte auf der Grundlage der Einheit von Religion und Politik beherrscht wurden. Weil meinem Verständnis nach gab es diese Einheit vielleicht seit dem 7. Jahrhundert nicht mehr. Ja? Dass auch in den islamischen Staaten der Geschichte weltliche Herrschaft und Theologie gar nicht eine Einheit waren, sondern unterschiedliche Sphären des gesellschaftlichen Lebens, im Grunde auch wie heute. Können Sie uns da vielleicht nochmal etwas dazu sagen, Professor Al-Ninowy?
Yeah, Bismillah. Also, I think that Islam as a religion came to build people. And Islam came to build the human being, character building the human being, and gave the human being wide frame. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not cheat, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt respect each other, etc., etc. So came to build the human being and empowered the human being with frame, an ethical frame, and allowed the human being to develop within that frame. And that's why you see the Prophet ﷺ, when upon his departure, he did not leave us a system in a sense. He did not tell you a system, an exact system of how to elect a political leader. This is such an important thing, but it doesn't say anything about it. Nothing. And that's why the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they had to actually sit together and figure out a way. And that's why there was this discrepancy at the beginning between the Sahaba themselves. What do we do? Select? Do we elect? So some say, well, there's enough signs that he mentioned to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. There's some says there's Sa'd ibn Ubadah or others were actually gathering together and they're trying to actually elect a leader already. And had the Prophet ﷺ left them something to say, all right, this is what you need to do, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how it is. And that tells you that the Prophet ﷺ left actually thinking, a frame, and within that frame, go ahead and work yourself. And that's why you see with Sayyidina Abu Bakr, there was that election, in a sense. You can call it election. With Sayyidina Umar, there was selection. With Sayyidina Uthman, there were 6 people. Rather than a popular election or a selection, there were 6 people council, they choose one of them. In Ali's time was probably a wider election with also some exceptions. And that shows you that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum themselves sort of did ijtihad in how do they take from the text and from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and decipher. And their ijtihad was to do 1, 2, 3. And I think that leaves you a platform.
Vielen Dank. Dann habe ich die nächste Frage, und zwar, wenn die Idee, dass Dinwadura, ich bin Politikwissenschaftler, die Einheit von Religion und Staat, wenn das also erst im 19. Jahrhundert entstanden ist, im Kampf gegen die Kolonialmächte. Und wenn wir uns dann weiter die Geschichte betrachten, also zum Beispiel die Idee des Dschihad als Krieg gegen die Ungläubigen eine deutsche Erfindung ist, die während dem Ersten Weltkrieg dazu gedient hat, um die Araber dazu zu bewegen, in den Krieg zu ziehen gegen die Briten. Und wenn wir weiter schauen und sehen, dass die Taliban entstanden ist in Afghanistan mit amerikanischer Unterstützung, um sie in den Krieg, also die Mujahideen in den Krieg gegen die Sowjets zu schicken und daraus die Taliban entstanden ist. Dann kam der Irakkrieg mit Hunderttausenden von Toten und daraus ist dann Al-Qaida entstanden, erstarkt und daraus dann der IS. Kann man dann sagen, dass die extremistische Form des Islam im Grunde ein Produkt des Westens ist, ein Produkt der Gewalt, des Kolonialismus, des Imperialismus, der Kriege, die auch unsere Religion in den Händen dieser Extremisten verrohen lassen und zu einem Mittel der Legitimation für Gewalt machen? Kann man das so sehen, dass da auch der Westen eine Wirkung hat auf die Entwicklung des Islam?
All right, that's a loaded question. No, I don't really, I'm not a conspiratorialist, so I don't really believe in conspiracy theories in general. I don't believe that the West made up everything. I don't like the point to blame everything. Everything, something happens, blame it on the West. I'm not saying you did that, I'm just saying I don't want to blame that. it's important to understand that Muslims are like everybody else. In other words, human beings. And in human beings, we are, as Muslims, we're part of the wider social fabric of humanity. In the social fabric of humanity, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Just because the person says he's Muslim doesn't mean that he's always doing good. We need to understand that what Islam says and what Muslims do are not necessarily the same. And that's not just to Muslims, that's to everybody else. In every society, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, am I saying that colonization, wars, did not really sort of push or was at least, to say, a catalyst to radicalize people? Absolutely it was. I mean, we all know this. The reason that Al-Qaeda first came, in a sense, or at least IS, or ISIL, or you call it ISIS or ISIS, I don't know what you call it. Anyway, ISIL, for example, that was after the Iraq invasion. All right. Now, am I saying that there is no non-violent extremism among Muslims? Absolutely not. There is. There is non-violent extremism. Has been there for a long time and still exists. Non-violent extremism. The reason for extremism, in my view, is always non-violent extremism first. What I mean is, extremism meaning violent extremism. The reason for violence is the precedence of non-violent extremism first. All right. Well, we're like any other society. There is non-violent extremism. People who are extreme but non-violent. For whatever reason. But is that fraction of non-violent extremists, do they represent the conscience of the Ummah? Are they a representation of the 1.6 billion Muslims that have been there? Or are they a representation of the 1,400 years, 1,400 years that Muslims have been around? Absolutely not. And all you have to do is, before what happened in Syria now, I mean, I was born in Syria, and I went to school where there was Jewish students, Christian students, Muslim students. They were your neighbors. We lived together for 1,400 years. Everyone believed what they believed, and everyone went about their business. Same with Iraq, with the Sunnis and the Shias. I mean, they lived together for 1,400 years. Now they're killing each other all of a sudden. So there's something that must have brought this into existence that was not there before. And what these things are, it's not just one thing. It's a lot of things. But I don't want to also say that there is no non-violent extremism that exists. Absolutely, there is violent extremism that exists within Muslims, but I think it's an absolute minority. It's actually statistically insignificant. On a biostatistical stage, I mean, if you have two standard deviation, it's insignificant, because you cannot take a whole faith system of 1.6 billion people and kidnap it because 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people do something.
Okay. Das ist genau der Punkt, den ich als nächstes aufgreifen wollte. Das Kidnapping, das eine Weltreligion von 1400 Jahren mit 1.600.000.000 Gläubigen im Begriff ist, in der öffentlichen Wahrnehmung in der Welt gekidnappt zu werden von einigen tausend gewalttätigen Extremisten und ihren Terrortaten. Das ist ja etwas, was dann auch in der Wahrnehmung vieler Jugendlicher uns immer mehr in eine Verteidigungsrolle drängt, oft auch in eine Opferrolle, weil tatsächlich Muslimfeindlichkeit zunimmt. Gerade Damen mit Hijab merken das sicher hier und dann auch im Alltag. Und wäre es dann nicht besonders wichtig, dass wir als Mainstream-Muslime vermehrt auch gesellschaftlich unsere Stimme erheben, uns Gehör verschaffen und auch an Diskursen teilnehmen, was ja natürlich Partizipation voraussetzt, dass wir als Muslime uns organisieren und am gesellschaftlichen Leben teilnehmen, auch als Gestalter, unsere Gesellschaften gemeinsam mit anderen gestalten und so auch den Stereotypen, die immer mehr auch die mediale Diskurse dominieren, etwas entgegensetzen. Ist es nicht so, dass da ein Konflikt besteht, weil der Mainstream-Islam aber oft eher unpolitisch ist und dann in diesen gesellschaftlichen Diskursen, in den politischen Diskursen dann ohne Stimme bleibt? Auch hier in Deutschland, wenn wir uns das betrachten, wir haben fast 3000 Moscheen, aber wo bleibt die Stimme dieser Millionen von Muslimen? Wo gehen wir auf die Straße gegen Krieg oder gegen Gewalt, setzen ein Zeichen, dass die Mehrheit der Muslime in Deutschland, in Europa und der Welt natürlich für Frieden sind, dass Islam Frieden bedeutet und so weiter? Bedeutet das nicht auch, dass wir als Muslime auch politisch aktiv werden müssen?
Ja. So a couple of things. First of all, I think I'm not a politician. I'm a theologian. I'm a medical professional. So I don't know anything about politics, and thank God I don't know anything about politics. I like that. It's good to be ignorant in few things, and politics is one of my things. But look, like I said earlier, it's no longer good enough for Muslims living in the West, whether it's in America or it is in Germany, to be good with the law of the land. They have to be good with the people of the land, and they need to participate. Now, I don't want to say go to this party or go to that party, but take ownership of your country. Because if you don't tell your story, someone else will be telling your story for you. And it's not always kind. And again, it doesn't necessarily stem from malice. It simply stems from ignorance. And you can't expect the other to go and read up about your religion, because you people don't read about theirs anyway. Do you read about other people's religion? Some of you may, but most of you don't. It's not fair to expect the others to know everything about us. So that's important. It's your job to actually go and introduce yourself and make good relations with the people. How do we do that? Obviously through political activism. Sure, be politically activist. But I want to say this. Be politically activist, but be country focused. You're German Muslims. That means for me, your German Muslims means your first priority is Germany, not Turkey, not Syria, not Tunisia, not Morocco, not Finland. I love Finland and I love Turkey and I love all of them. I am not saying you don't care. I love all of you too. That's not what I'm saying is you need to take care of your house. You put your house first, and then you worry. You do other things. I'm not saying it means you stop doing other things for other Muslim communities or non-Muslim communities also who are oppressed. Muslims in Germany need to also show solidarity with other communities who are also oppressed, whether they're Muslims or non-Muslims, whether you agree with their orientation or political agenda or you don't agree, because you're part of the society. There are common values we need to understand and that we share with the wider society. So number one, I think you need to be German specific and world general, sure. And also positive contribution. Now the problem is you're saying that, all right, we need to have our voice heard. Unfortunately, media in Western countries is for profit. Media is a non-profit charitable organization. They don't do things for charity. You don't expect them to give you a free microphone. And it's wrong to expect them for, you know what, I like you. Why don't you have half an hour free? Tell people about what you believe. They're not going to give you. This is capitalism. You know what? Work hard for it. So I don't like to blame the media for anything. The media is for profit, you people. Come on. All right? So guess what? You don't like the media? Make your own radio station. You're in a free country. You don't like it? Make a TV station. You people are working. You're professionals. You can do it. All right, you tell me, well, you're in America, you don't have it, and you're probably, American Muslims are probably more better off, or whatever it is. I don't even know. I don't have statistics for that. But all right, what I'm saying is we cannot blame the other always for things that we can do something about. You can blame everybody all you want. What are you doing about it? That's the question. Are you sitting and blaming or doing? So, you know what? People may not listen to your good voice, Professor. But I need to keep talking. And you know what? It doesn't matter if you listen or not, because I love my country. I love the people. I care genuinely about the German people that are walking on the street that I don't know. I don't know their names. I don't know their faces. I don't know what they believe in. I don't really care. But I care about them as human beings. I care about the well-being of their children. I care about their homes being safe. I care about their education. I care about their health. And I want them to have the best life. I don't care if they don't believe in Islam. But I care about them. And I want them to be happy. If they believe in Islam, Allahu Akbar. That's great. That's what I would like. But I can, as a Muslim, I am obligated to be good to everyone, regardless if they're good or not good to me. Otherwise, it defies the whole concept of religion.